I never thought silence could be louder than shouting. But the day I stood outside that glass office door, holding a cheap paper cup of coffee I didn't even remember buying, I realized just how wrong I'd been. Inside that room, my boss was laughing. Not the polite, professional laugh he used in meetings. This one was relaxed, careless, almost cruel. And in that moment, everything I'd spent years enduring finally snapped into focus. My name is Ethan Cole. At least that's the name I'll use here. And for most of my adult life, I was the guy people didn't see. Or worse, the guy they saw and immediately dismissed. You know the type. Dependable, quiet, always doing the work no one else wanted, never taking credit, never making noise. I told myself that was integrity. Turns out, it was just invisibility with a nicer label. I worked at a mid-sized tech consulting firm in downtown Seattle. Nothing glamorous. Long hours, tight deadlines, clients who changed their minds every other day. I was good at my job. Not in a flashy way, but in the way that kept projects from collapsing at 2 a.m. My boss, Mark Halverson, loved that about me. Loved it because it meant he could take credit without worrying I'd speak up. He had that smooth confidence, the kind people mistake for competence. Tall, loud, always joking. The kind of guy who slapped you on the back while stepping on your toes. Early on, he figured me out. Figured out that I wouldn't argue in meetings, that I'd fix mistakes quietly, that I'd stay late without complaining. So he pushed. Gave me impossible timelines. Took my ideas and presented them like they'd just come to him in the shower. When clients praised his solutions, he'd smile and nod, then later tell me, "Good team effort, Ethan. This is how you get ahead." Yeah, that happened. I told myself it was temporary. That if I just worked harder, stayed consistent, someone would notice. Promotions would come. Respect would follow. Funny thing about being patient, people start assuming you'll wait forever. Years passed. My title didn't change. My workload doubled. New hires came in people I trained, and somehow they leapfrogged me. When I asked Mark about it once carefully calmly, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're solid where you are. Not everyone's cut out for leadership." He smiled when he said it like he was doing me a favor. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling for hours. Not angry, just empty. I started wondering if he was right. Maybe I really wasn't leadership material. Maybe keeping my head down was all I was good for. That's how self-doubt works. It doesn't scream. It whispers until you start repeating it in your own voice. The breaking point didn't come with a fight. It came with a coincidence. A late night. A forgotten document. I had stayed after hours to finish a client risk analysis Mark needed for a morning pitch. Around 10, I realized I'd left my access badge at my desk upstairs. I took the elevator back up the office. Quiet lights dimmed. As I walked down the hallway toward Mark's office, I heard voices. His voice. And another one. Someone from the executive team. They were talking about the pitch, about the strategy, about my work. Mark said, "Yeah, Ethan put together some decent groundwork, but I refined it. You know how he is, not really a big-picture guy." The other man laughed. "Well, whatever you did, it impressed the client. They're talking expansion." Mark chuckled. "That's what I'm here for." I stood there longer than I should have. Coffee going cold in my hand. Heart pounding not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't bad communication. This was a pattern. A choice. And I finally saw it without the fog of hope. Something shifted that night. Not dramatically. I didn't storm in. I didn't confront him. I went home, slept a few hours, and came back the next morning with a strange calm. I started paying attention. Not emotionally, strategically. I noticed how Mark rushed decisions, how he skipped details, how often he leaned on me at the last second. I started documenting everything. Emails, drafts, timestamps, contributions. Quietly, methodically. No drama. Around that time, an opportunity appeared where I least expected it. A former client reached out on LinkedIn. She said, "Hey, random question. Do you ever do independent consulting?" I almost laughed. Independent, me, the invisible guy. But I answered honestly. Said I had experience but not my own firm. She replied, "Well, your solution saved us $250,000 last year. If you're interested, we'd love to talk." That conversation changed everything. Slowly at first, then all at once. I didn't quit my job. I didn't tell Mark. I started taking small projects on weekends, nights. One client became two, two became four, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Clients asked my opinion and actually listened. They paid on time. They thanked me. It was intoxicating in the healthiest way possible. The irony, Mark noticed my change before anyone else. One afternoon, he called me into his office. "You've been distracted lately," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Everything okay?" I looked at him and smiled. A real smile, not the polite one I'd perfected. "I'm fine," I said. "Just busy." He didn't like that answer. Control tends to slip when the quiet guy stops explaining himself. Things escalated during a major contract review. Mark presented a proposal based heavily on my original framework, except this time he cut a few corners. Risky ones. I warned him privately. He brushed me off. "Relax, Ethan. Don't overthink it." The client asked a question he couldn't answer. Silence stretched. Then I spoke up. Calm, precise. I explained the gap, offered a solution, backed it with data. The room shifted. People leaned in. The client nodded. Mark stared at me like I'd just broken an unspoken rule. After the meeting, he cornered me. "Don't undermine me like that again," he snapped. I met his gaze steady. "I answered the client's question," I said. "That's my job." His face flushed. "You think you're smarter than me now?" I paused. "I think accuracy matters," I replied. That was the moment. The line was crossed. Not loudly, permanently. 2 weeks later, I handed in my resignation. No counteroffer, no dramatic speech, just a letter and a calm explanation. Mark laughed, actually laughed. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You won't last on your own." I nodded. Maybe I said, "But I won't disappear." That shut him up. Leaving was terrifying. I won't pretend otherwise. Some nights I stared at my laptop wondering if I'd just torpedoed my career out of pride. But the work came. Slowly, then faster. Word spread. Clients followed. Within a year I was earning more than I ever had under Mark. And more importantly, I owned my name again. The real twist came later. A former coworker called me one evening. "Hey," she said, hesitating. "Mark's in trouble. Turns out his shortcuts caught up with him. Audits. Lost clients. Leadership didn't like surprises. The same traits he'd mocked me for, caution, detail, patience, were suddenly what the company needed. Too late. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I felt resolved. Like a chapter closed without needing a final argument. Last I heard, Mark took a role at a smaller firm far from the spotlight he craved. Maybe he learned something. Maybe he didn't. That part isn't mine to manage. What I know is this. Being underestimated can feel like a curse, but it's also camouflage. It gives you space to learn to prepare to build quietly. And when you finally step forward, the contrast is undeniable. I didn't win by shouting. I won by choosing myself when no one else would. So here's my question for you. When someone is dismissed, overlooked, or labeled not enough, who's really being judged? Their ability or other people's comfort with power? Tell me what you think. Have you ever been underestimated? Or underestimated someone else? Was justice served or just delayed? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it.